Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, the story continues to revolve around Lythieuca and Hung, beginning on a morning that seemed utterly ordinary, yet quietly carried more emotion than any other day. That morning, the village road was still damp with mist. Tiny droplets clung to the leaves lining the path, and the chilly air unconsciously slowed every step. Hoai held Tony's hand tightly, guiding him forward one steady step at a time. The familiar road suddenly felt longer to her, because today was different from all the mornings before. After a long period of taking her son to speech therapy, persisting day after day, session after session, today Tony was officially returning to school to be with his classmates. As they walked, Hoai kept stealing glances at her son. Tony's small hand gradually warmed in his mother's grasp. His steps were still a little hesitant, but he no longer stopped midway as he used to. Inside her heart, emotions intertwined. Joy quietly surfaced at the thought of her child sitting back in the classroom, surrounded by voices and laughter once again. Yet somewhere deep down lingered an unspoken worry, fear that he might struggle to fit in, fear that curious stares from others would make him retreat into himself. Still, Hoai reminded herself to keep moving forward, because she knew that if she hesitated, Tony would hesitate too. By the roadside, a small sticky rice stall sent up clouds of steam. Hoai paused and quickly bought a hot bowl of sticky rice for her son. It was a simple, familiar meal, but in that chilly morning, the warm bowl seemed to carry all of a mother's care and hope. Tony held the bowl with both hands, eating slowly, his eyes occasionally wandering around. Hoai did not rush him. She only watched quietly, as if wanting to remember every small expression of her child on this special day. When they reached the school gate, the sound of students chatting and laughing grew clearer. Tony squeezed his mother's hand slightly, but he kept walking. The moment he politely bowed his head to greet the teacher made Hoai freeze. The bow was still a little clumsy, the greeting not yet perfectly clear, but it was enough to make her heart tighten with emotion. To Hoai, it was not just a greeting, it was a milestone marking a long journey filled with patience, exhaustion, and countless tears. A simple school morning, yet within it lay all the faith she had gathered over so many years. That same morning, in a small corner of the market not far away, Tung quietly began a very different day. The market had grown busier, with vendors' calls and the noise of traffic blending into a familiar bustle. Amid the flow of people, Tung walked slowly, her eyes scanning each stall. She knocked on doors one by one, asking for work in a soft voice that had become all too familiar. But the answers were still the same, gentle refusals, accompanied by habitual shakes of the head. With the Lunar New Year approaching, everyone said they already had enough workers and could not take on anyone new. Some looked at her with pity, others waved her away hastily, as if afraid of trouble. Tung lowered her head, thanked them, and walked on, repeating the same routine again and again. Her legs ached after hours of walking, but what weighed on her more was the emptiness in her heart. With no permanent home and no stable job, her life drifted by in uncertainty, moving from one temporary place to another. Few people knew that behind her worn clothes, weathered appearance, and exhausted face lay a past Tung always tried to hide. The mistakes of earlier years clung to her like silent shadows, keeping her from lifting her head high or daring to look back for too long. In the crowded market, Tung continued to walk on quietly, carrying burdens that few ever noticed, letting the morning pass in silence and waiting. Long ago, Tung lived through a period of her life that, later on, she barely dared to touch in her own memories. Back then, she was young, eager for excitement, easily swept along by sweet invitations and nights that stretched endlessly. At first, it was just a few casual gambling games, something to pass the time, to avoid feeling left behind among her circle of friends. But the thrill of winning and losing, the rush that came with every bet, quietly seeped into her blood. Without realizing it, Tung slowly lost control. The money she earned no longer stayed in her hands for long. It vanished as quickly as the bets she placed, again and again. Her family began to notice the change. What started as gentle reminders gradually turned into reproaches, and then into heavy, suffocating silences. Tung made countless promises, to stop, to start over, but each promise was swiftly dragged down by the pull of gambling. With every broken vow, her family's trust dwindled, little by little, until there was no longer enough left to pull her back. Everything truly collapsed when Tung finally came to her senses, only to realize it was already too late. Debts piled up, and unfamiliar faces began showing up at the house more and more often. The home that had once been the only refuge for her and her mother started to feel fragile, as if it could disappear at any moment. Then, her mother fell seriously ill. Prescriptions, hospital admissions, and mounting medical bills caused the financial burden to grow heavier by the day. In panic and despair, Tung found herself facing a choice she had never imagined she would have to make. In the end, the house was sold to pay for her mother's treatment. At the moment she signed the transfer papers, Tung felt as if she herself had been pushed out of the place she once called home. The house slipped from her grasp, leaving behind a cold emptiness that stretched across both her life and her mind. From then on, her life spiraled downward without breaks. With no stable place to live, she drifted from one temporary shelter to another, taking any job she could find just to earn enough for a meal. On nights when she curled up in cramped, makeshift rooms, regret and shame quietly gnawed at her, reminding her that all her present hardships stemmed from the mistakes of the past. It was during those difficult days that Tung unexpectedly ran into Hoai on the road leading out to the fields during harvest season. The familiar scene, the scent of earth, the smell of straw, the wind sweeping across the fields, made her heart tighten. When she realized the person standing before her was Hoai, Tung almost froze. Her gaze dropped immediately, because there were memories that had never truly faded, only been buried deep to avoid facing them. She remembered clearly how, years ago, Hoai had carried a small child in her arms while renting a piece of her family's land to farm and survive. The image of that thin woman, holding a newborn baby, her voice trembling as she begged to stay a little longer because she had nowhere else to go, still appeared vividly in Tung's mind. But at that time, her mother, under financial pressure and determined to sell the land to support the family, had coldly taken it back. Those pleas fell into hopelessness, unanswered by even a hint of compassion. Hoai left quietly that day, carrying her child and the despair of someone with no way out. And Tung, though not the one who voiced the decision, knew all too well that she was part of the reason it happened. If she had not fallen into gambling, if she had not pushed her family into such hardship, perhaps her mother would never have made such a cruel choice. Standing before Hoai in the present, all the shame, guilt, and regret surged up at once. Tung did not dare to lift her head or meet her eyes. She could only lower her face, letting old memories and harsh reality overlap and press down on her, so heavy it was almost impossible to breathe. But Hoai did not bring up the past at all. Faced with Tung's awkwardness and downcast gaze, she simply stopped and spoke in a calm, gentle voice, as if there had never been any distance between them. Hoai asked a few ordinary, heartfelt questions: how Tung had been living lately, whether she had a stable place to stay, how her work was going. There was no reproach, not even a look that could make the other person feel small. It was precisely this quiet kindness that made Tung's throat tighten with emotion. At first, Tung responded cautiously, giving brief answers just to get through the conversation. But under Hoai's patient listening, the stories she had buried for so long slowly began to spill out. She spoke of days spent wandering from place to place looking for work, of makeshift meals, of nights when she had no idea where she would go or what she would do the next morning. At times, her voice grew hoarse and her eyes reddened, yet Hoai remained silent, never interrupting, only occasionally nodding, as if to say she was listening, that she understood. Few people knew that after the upheaval of those years, when Hoai left the old land with her child and nothing in her hands, Hung was the one quietly standing behind her. Without fanfare or display, he slowly saved every coin, borrowed wherever he could, and eventually bought back that very piece of land. When Hoai learned the truth, she stood in silence for a long time. To her, it was not merely a plot of land, but a chance for mother and child to have a home, a place to put down roots, a lifeline that kept them from being swept away during their most desperate days. Thanks to that land, Hoai was able to begin again. She farmed, took on odd jobs, and carefully saved every bit she earned to raise her child. Through stormy days and constant shortages, she held on, because behind her there was always Hung, quietly supporting her. It was this perseverance that helped Hoai gradually make it through the darkest period of her life, even though the old scars never truly faded. Knowing all of this, Hoai still chose to treat Tung with kindness. She did not bring up what had happened years ago, nor did she allow the past to become a barrier between them. To Hoai, what had happened was painful enough, revisiting it would only deepen the torment. She gently advised Tung to let go of her old mistakes, to treat them as lessons, and to stand up and start over, even if the road ahead would still be full of hardship. Hoai invited Tung to join her in the harvest. It was not an invitation born of pity, but a sincere gesture, as one woman to another sharing similar struggles. They went out to the fields together early in the morning, cutting and bundling crops side by side, sweat soaking through their clothes. By noon, they loaded the vegetables onto a cart and brought them to the market, sitting by a small stall and patiently waiting for each customer. The money they earned was little, but it was earned by their own hands, owing nothing to anyone, bowing to no one. In the days that followed, the two women worked together on everything, building a gate, pouring concrete, taking on both heavy and light tasks without complaint. Their hands were caked with mud, their clothes stained, their backs aching after long days of labor. Yet amid all that hardship, their hearts slowly grew warmer. They did not need many words. Just knowing there was someone beside them, working together, enduring together, striving together, was enough to make each step feel a little lighter. The afternoon slowly faded, and the last light of day stretched across the newly paved concrete road, reflecting a gentle pale golden glow. Hung returned after a long day of work, his steps slowing as he caught sight of the road that had just been completed. The cement was not yet fully dry, footprints and rough wool marks still lingering on both sides. He stood there for a long while without saying a word, quietly gazing at it, as if looking back on a long journey he had already traveled. More than anyone else, Hung understood what Hoai had been through. He had witnessed the days she struggled to raise her child on her own, the nights when exhaustion nearly broke her, yet she still chose not to complain. He also knew that to be able to treat Tung with such kindness today, Hoai had to let go of many old wounds buried deep in her heart. It was precisely this generosity that made Hung cherish even more the woman standing quietly before him, never loud, never seeking credit, simply living true to her own heart. The Christmas atmosphere gradually spread throughout the small neighborhood. Colorful lights were switched on one by one, and soft, warm Christmas music drifted from somewhere nearby. Hoai helped Tony straighten his clothes and took him outside for a walk, letting him soak in that rare, festive liveliness. Tony looked around excitedly, his eyes lighting up at the twinkling lights and the simple yet colorful decorations. Hoai walked beside her son, holding his small hand tightly, her heart feeling lighter after a long day. When Hoai invited Tung to come along, she only shook her head gently. Tung smiled, a smile still tinged with hesitation, then excused herself, saying she was tired. She chose to walk back alone, her steps slow along the newly finished road. The surroundings gradually grew quiet, leaving only the soft sound of the wind and the Christmas lights reflecting on the pavement. In that moment, Tung allowed the tangle of thoughts to wash over her. The past, the present, old mistakes, dark days, all intertwined. But unlike before, she no longer felt that familiar emptiness. Instead, there was a strange new feeling, fragile, yet warm. For the first time in a very long while, Tung clearly sensed that her life was not truly over. There was still a path leading back, a chance to begin again, slowly, not easily, but a path opened by the kindness of others. She stopped and turned to look toward the brightly lit road in the distance, where Hoai and Tony were gradually disappearing from view. Within Tung, something quietly began to change, like a seed just planted, yet to sprout, but already alive. The story of Hoai, Hung, and Tung does not end here. What choices will Tung make next? Where will the roads ahead lead each of them? Stay tuned for the next episode to discover what happens next. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment to share your feelings, and continue this journey with me in the stories to come.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay thì mình tiếp tục đưa đến video về câu chuyện của Hoài Ca và Hầu nha mọi người. Mình đang viết nội dung nữa.